Well, happy Wednesday of Holy Week. We pick up the story where Jesus is dining at the house of Simon known as Simon the leper. Now, we know that the Pharisees and the chief priests have been scheming for a way to trap Jesus, but they have to be careful given the fact that this is the Passover celebration. There are over 2 million people in Jerusalem at this time, so a wrong move on their part could set off the masses against them. But they're hoping to play their cards right. They actually want to get the masses on their side. And that's the context in which we pick up our story today. Mark chapter 14, beginning in verse 3. And while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at the table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly. And she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, "Why was the ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor." And they scolded her. So while the religious and the community leaders are conspiring against Jesus, what do we see Jesus doing? He's having dinner. He's having dinner with Simon, a man known as a leper. Of course, he's no longer leprous at this time. Many scholars, in fact, believe that Jesus had already healed him of this disease. And I just love the thought of that in Christ, all of us are given a new name, but Simon wants to keep his old identity, his old reputation as a leper, because it points to the rescue story of Jesus. Now, in the middle of this feast, Mary interjects. She comes in and begins to anoint the head of Jesus with this very expensive perfume. Now, many of the men in the room were disgusted by this, declaring it as a waste of money. After all, it was a year's worth of wages. And they said, hey, it could have been given to the poor. Now, I want you to think for a second. Can you imagine giving your entire year's salary to the church? I'm guessing that would grab some funny looks. You would certainly receive some criticism. But once she's committed, once she's broken the flask, there's no way to put it back in. The sacrifice has already been made. Now, we know what the men thought of this move, but I stop and wonder, how did that land on the heart of Mary? Any insecurities she was already feeling would have been stirred up. It would have had her second guessing herself. Have you ever been shamed by someone? I'm guessing in that moment she had a sense of guilt and shame, thinking, oh no, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe this should have been given to the poor. But notice how that's the very moment that Jesus steps in and rescues her as well. In fact, look at verse 6. But Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you will always have the poor with you. And whenever you want, you can do good for them. But you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly, I say to you, whenever or wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her." I mean, isn't that cool? They shame her, but Jesus elevates her. And here I am today fulfilling the very words of Jesus as I declare the gospel in memory of her faithful act. In fact, all 4 gospel writers include her. Now, we understand who Mary is. She's Mary of Bethany. You might know her better as Mary, as in Mary and Martha. Or said another way, the sister of Lazarus, the man that Jesus raised from the dead. You probably remember how that story played out. You remember the way that Mary and Martha felt when Jesus showed up too late. Of course, we know that with Jesus, it's never too late. I mean, the women were understandably upset, but Jesus shows up, and what does he do? He calls Lazarus out of the grave. So here he comes walking out of the tomb, looking like a mummy, and they begin to unwrap him because he's alive. Now, in light of that story, do you think it's even possible that what Mary gave as a gift was too great of an expense for Jesus? I don't think so. You see, that's actually the kind of generosity that flows out of someone who's not just heard the gospel, but as someone who has received the gospel. You might be saying, well, what is the gospel? Well, it's the story of Jesus when he takes the sick and the shameful and the lepers and the broken and the rejected, and he receives them. He reclaims them for his own purpose. He calls them his own and gives them a new name. The gospel is what forms people to follow Jesus into this sacrificial life where there is no price too great to pay when it comes to serving Jesus and serving his kingdom. The gospel demands our worship, and our worship is a lifestyle of sacrifice. It's sacrificial love. After all, Mary is also anointing the body of Jesus. She's preparing his body for burial. And no one else seems to understand this. So Jesus just spells it out for them after she spills it out for him. He tells them that the poor, they'll always be there, but he's about to go away. He's about to follow the Father's command to go to death, even death on the cross. So she anoints his body for burial. The sacrifice that Mary made that day, it wasn't too great. In fact, it was meager in light of the sacrifice that Christ is about to make for her and for us on the cross. There's no way we can overpay or outpay or outgive Jesus. So on Wednesday, I pray that you and I will consider all that he has done for us. His forgiveness, his sacrifice, his salvation, all of those things. But even more, I pray that we'll take time to count our blessings, to think about the numerous ways that he has blessed our lives as children of the King. I pray that each of us will draw the conclusion that we will never be able to outgive Jesus. We will never offer too much in comparison to what he has given us. So take time to remember. Before you come to the table on Good Friday, take time to remember his sacrifice and consider how you can pour out your life by way of generosity, sacrifice, and worship. Have a great day.